Hi, my name is Derek Adiano, and I will be going over this chapter in the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. And the chapter is the Qwerty keyboard. So the main idea of this chapter is how the invention of the modern keyboard, the Qwerty keyboard, was what allowed him to become who he is today. This author, and you can see it right here in this little screenshot of the text. He says. I struggled to talk out loud online back in 1991. I wasn't made of anxious flesh and brittle bone. I was made of keystrokes. When I could no longer bear to be myself, I was able to become, for a while, a series of keystrokes in quick succession. So it's just him saying that this keyboard is what allowed him to escape from who he was back when he was younger. And we'll go over how he does this, how he explains this in these few sections of the chapter. So using pass, there's only real two things you can do for pass. Other two, they don't really apply to the chapter. But anywho, so number one purpose, his purpose of writing this chapter is obviously as well to connect this invention of the keyboard to him, his growth as a person, but also to exemplify how this human superpower, he believes, is not what individuals can do, but what the kind of creations members of a group can do and build and maintain together, and how these inventions have aided him in life. Which, as an example, he uses the keyboard. And the situation here is just Green reminiscing on how much he's grown and his past. How he was grown from a timid writer to a confident typist. So I divided this chapter into three sections, and the first section will be paragraphs 1 through 3. So for a quick summation of this first section is it's just him basically introducing the history of the keyboard. Nothing too much. It's just a quick little intro, and he brings over this short little anecdote back when he was younger in 5th grade, and then also that allows him to establish his actual purpose that he will be talking about in his argument in the later paragraphs to come. So to begin, like I said, here he uses in the first paragraph just a quick little summation of the history of the keyboard, and he just says that it came to be from mechanics, a militant vegetarian, a Wisconsin politician, and so on and so forth. So to actually bring up this conversation, he brings up a quick little story of when he was younger. And the actual story isn't too relevant to the argument of the text, but it sort of does tie into it. So he wrote this biography about Thomas Edison, and the actual biography isn't really important to the actual text, but if you pay close attention, at the very last part of the second paragraph, he mentions his shaky penmanship. And this already, from the get-go, establishes how he wasn't very confident in himself. He was always timid, a little nervous, a little insecure himself, judging from shaky. And he, in this second paragraph, he uses obviously an anecdote and appeals to ethos, basically just saying, hey, I wasn't that confident. I just used very interesting a lot in the biography, blah blah blah, whatever. But then he smoothly transitions into the other paragraph, talking about his actual main point of this whole text, which is, to quote him, in both cases, Edison worked with collaborators to build upon existing inventions, which is one of the human superpowers, yada yada yada. It is not what our individual members do, but the kind of systems we build and maintain together. So he connects his story, his little quick anecdote of his biography of Edison, to his actual purpose. How Edison wasn't the one man that created the light bulb, right? He had other people that helped him. There were other people in the equation, not just one person. And that's what he's basically going to be explaining throughout the rest of his chapter. And he connects this obviously later to himself and how this has helped him. And then he does a little cute little comparison of what he just said, saying the light bulb is cool and everything, but what's really cool is the electrical grid used to power it. So it's just a quick little, summary of explanation of what he just said. So moving on to the second section, which is paragraphs 4 through 11. In these paragraphs, Green goes over the history of the typewriter and describes how the collaboration of all these individuals has driven the eventual invention of the Qwerty keyboard. So that's just a quick little summary of this second section, and we'll go into more depth here. So not much happens in this section. It's a very beefy section in terms of length, but the whole thing is just a chronological order of the history of it. So its syntax is chronological, and he does appeal to logos, but not much happens. He just goes over just basically explaining how it came to be. Starting from the very beginning on this one guy that got inspired from this other guy, and that's basically how the whole thing goes. So saying, but this guy did this, this guy did that, but then wait, the other guy did this, and then came this guy, blah blah blah. It just keeps going until they get to the very end and say, surprise, the Qwerty keyboard came to be. So that's just him explaining how it happened. Nothing much else is said, and later, the next section, he actually goes over how all of this has helped him to become what he is today. So here we are, third section, 12 to 17. Finally, Green here connects this invention of the keyboard and how it has allowed him to grow as a person. So here he actually explains everything. So here he appeals to Kairos. Kairos is appealing to time, usually used for nostalgic purposes, and he does that, especially here, a lot here. He immediately says that this keyboard isn't perfect, but it is very efficient and it does what it's supposed to do, and saying how it has certainly worked for him, especially in elementary school. Now he is here again reminiscing back when he was in elementary school. He also appeals to ethos, as later I'll explain. He explains this, not a story, but this sort of sappy anecdote, this sort of sad telling of his how he was always very insecure, and also using dramatic diction. He uses a lot of harsh or dramatized descriptions of him. Example here saying, I had terrible handwriting and anxious flesh and brittle bones, and so on and so forth. So here he explains how this keyboard was one of the first things he ever became good at, and that says a lot considering he's just a little kid, and how he no matter how hard he tried to work with a pencil, it wouldn't work for him. But he started using the keyboard because of these games he wanted to play, and eventually he felt success for probably the first time of his life. And he says these days I can type as fast as I can think, and he has connected with his keyboard so much that his brain has learned to think of the alphabet as beginning Qwerty. So he again goes over how this keyboard is the path to having his thoughts, also the path of sharing them, and then he compares the keyboard to a musical instrument. It in itself is an instrument. He calls this a literary piano, and coming from a person who actually does play an instrument, I play an instrument, so myself, he's right. Instruments, especially when it comes to music, can allow you to feel like you're just not there. You're just in the paper of the music. You're just in the music. You're with the flow, right? And he compares an instrument to the keyboard. That this, although he can't play an actual keyboard, he becomes a series of keys struck in succession, just to quote him, and he says he develops a certain percussive rhythm, um, which I agree with him. Yeah, it definitely, when playing an instrument, musical or not, you definitely feel something when you're connected to it. And for him, it was a keyboard that has allowed him to feel this way. And he used to be, timid and whatnot, but now he's grown. So, just a quick analysis of this whole chapter is that he uses the invention of the keyboard as an example of describing the human superpower that he believes is human superpower. He relies on anecdotes, Kairos, and ethos to explain the incredible ways humans can engineer products through the inspiration of others, and in the long run, influence lives in the far future. Another example is the mobile phone. Steve Jobs wasn't the only person to create a phone or create just the the touchscreen phone out of nowhere. There were other phones in the past, and that's what Green here was trying to explain. That it's not what us as individuals can do, but what we build upon of others. That we grab inspiration from others. That nothing just comes out of something just doesn't come out of nowhere. It just comes from something. Everything originates from something, and we sometimes take for granted these little things. That these insignificant things, this keyboard that just seems just pieces of plastic on just a little grid that just connects to a monitor, we take it for granted because what may seem insignificant was inspirational, was influential to this fifth grade student. That it was the one thing he needed to become who he is today. So, to rate this chapter, I give it a 3. He gave the keyboard a 4, which I agree on. Would give the keyboard a 4, but for the chapter, I'd give it a 3. It does a great job explaining the human superpower, what he believes is the human superpower, but it could be a bit repetitive and a bit lengthy, especially in the history part. It was just him basically explaining over and over again how all these guys and engineers and mechanics came together and influenced one another and inspired one another to just make the keyboard in the end. And that's it. Thank you for watching.